Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about 3 different tactics that I highly suggest you try the next time you come to Lake Chickamauga or really any of the TVA fisheries this time of year, which we're talking about, you know, right now we're in late December, almost getting into the first of the new year, and all these tactics are really going to work all the way through, you know, February and March. And they're also, one thing I do want to mention about these, all 3 of these tactics are really shallow water power fishing tactics, which kind of fits my style. So there's a lot of ways that you can catch them on the TVA fisheries this time of year during the winter and early spring months. But these are 3 of my absolute favorites that I highly suggest you try. I will say that other than mentioning right now, there is one bait that I would definitely also try, and that is an Alabama rig. Alabama rig is just a standby, you know, in the last 10 years when it comes to fishing the TVA. So definitely have one of those tied on. But these are the other 3 baits that I would highly suggest. So let's start out with a small swim bait. This is a rig that I've been throwing a lot, and I've done a lot of videos on this because it just flat out catches fish. One thing that happens, especially out here on Lake Chickamauga this time of year, is that a lot of the small threadfin shad schools are in the backs of these creeks in the shallow water, and also just kind of working the edges of the weed lines that are still around. And so those fish out here start to get really keyed in on small bait fish, and this little 3-inch Z-Man minnows is just such a killer presentation. It looks realistic. I can fish it all day and catch you know, dozens of fish on it without having to change it, and it's just the right profile. This is my absolute favorite way to catch them, especially early in the wintertime. You know, late November, that's generally where I'm going to be throwing this, and all through December as well. And sometimes even, you know, once we get into February and March, this starts playing a big role again. But anytime you've got small bait fish, this right here, this is the finesse-sized jig head paired with the pearl blue glimmer minnows from Z-Man. That is the exact rig that I like to throw out here. Generally I'm fishing 1/8 ounce, 1/4 ounce, and 3/8 ounce, depending on how fast I want to reel this bait and how shallow I'm fishing. So just kind of adapt to the conditions with the size head. And as far as the rig that I'm going to be throwing this on, it's going to be a 610 medium heavy Versus Series spinning rod, an S4000 spinning reel, that's a stunner spinning reel, and then I've got the main line of 20-pound smackdown braid and a 10-pound gold label fluorocarbon leader. So that is the setup that I'm using. Generally throwing that around whatever remaining grass we have this time of year, which is usually in that 2 and 3 foot range. And when you do find that grass, generally you're going to be able to be, you know, keeping your presentation around fish because they just kind of hang around whatever grass is available. So throwing that, just making fan casts, covering water, but really good way to catch fish. And once you find them, you know, just throw that thing around and you'll definitely mop them up. The next bait that I really like this time of year, no surprise, is a lipless crankbait. A lipless crankbait is a just classic TVA early season bait. It catches a lot of fish, and really the biggest decision you need to make is whether you're using shad patterns or crawfish patterns. Both of these are gonna to work at different times and sometimes at the same time, but right now I'm actually catching more fish on the shad patterns. Those fish are still focused on shad, and when it gets colder and those fish start really focusing on you know, crayfish more, that's when I'll switch over to the red. Generally, you know, once it gets into February and early March, red is the way to go. But make sure you've got both of those different colors, shad and crayfish, and you'll be set. One thing I will note about fishing the lipless crankbait this time of year is instead of doing a straight retrieve, a lot of times I'm going to be casting it out and kind of working it on the bottom like a yo-yo technique, just like you would be fishing a jig or something else like that. And I'm fishing around the grass, trying to rip it through the grass and let it flutter back down to the bottom. And that is the biggest key. And one thing I will mention that is really important this time of year is changing out the hooks on your lipless crankbaits. I'm using the Hayabusa treble hooks. I like the ones with the NRB coating because it's even easier to get good hook penetration. But this time of year, you'll get a lot of fish just swipe at it, and so you want really, really sharp hooks. Don't go out there with dull hooks, believe me. It is really important to have sharp hooks. So going back to the gear that I'm using this with, both, any of the lipless crankbaits you're throwing, I like to use a 7.3 medium heavy rod. I like a stiffer rod just so I can rip it through the grass a lot easier and get good contact and kind of feel what the bait is doing down there. So I like a graphite fast action rod for doing this. And I'm gonna be using a high-speed gear ratio reel, or kind of in that moderate range. 7.2 to 1 is the one that I like to throw. And finally, the line is really important this time of year. I like to throw heavier line. 17 and 20 pound test fluorocarbon is definitely the way that I'm gonna be going. And the reason for that is the heavier the line, the more drag you're gonna create and the slower this bait's gonna fall. And so I really want a line that's a little bit heavier so I can kind of slow the fall of this bait as it kind of shimmies down to the bottom. So use heavier line. This is a power fishing tactic. These fish aren't line shy, in the situations you're throwing this bait. So 17, 20 pound test, that's generally what I like to throw. Finally, we've got a suspending jerkbait. Suspending jerkbait is a really killer technique. A lot of times during the winter months and early spring, anytime you've got fish, bait fish dying after a cold front, that's a really good time to throw a jerkbait. And really just always have it tied on and try it, because if the jerkbait bite is on, it could be just red hot. And sometimes it's just not on at all. Sometimes you'll get some swipes at it, but they're really not just choking it. So overall, if you're faced with clearer water situations and colder water where there's maybe a shad die-off, a suspending jerkbait is pretty killer. It's hard to beat. So I'm generally fishing this on a 7.3 medium action rod. I use the Versa series again for that. And I like the 7.3 because the shorter rods I tend to hit on the side of the boat when I'm creating the action and jerking this jerkbait. So I really like that longer rod, so I'm not just constantly breaking rods on the side of the boat. But anyways, I'm gonna be throwing this on 10 pound test fluorocarbon, either Red Label or Invisex. Those are the two lines I use for this. And again, using a high-speed gear ratio reel to keep bringing in that slack. So overall, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I know you're gonna catch fish on one of these three tactics. See ya out on the water.